I've made some really good progress here on this early 63 or late 62 AC30. The owner thought it was a 64, but I think given everything that I mentioned in the previous video, late 62, early 63 is much more likely. So here in the output tubes area, where the output tube sockets are, there used to be this really dark filmy residue all over everything, and it was a combination of dirt and old wax and some heat issues, and that all cleaned up mostly with naphtha. Naphtha cuts through wax. Isopropyl really does not. So I got all that cleaned up, and I replaced the screen grids and grid stoppers with these Vichy 2 watts. Not because of the wattage so much as though it's nicer on the screen grids, but because these are physically long resistors, and they will span the longest reach, which would be here on this tube here, from the screen all the way over here. And I've got some yellow and green, depending on green for a grid, yellow for a screen, heat shrink on them just to keep them from getting moved and shorting out to places they should not. And the increased values of 1Ks and 3Ks over the stock 100 ohms and 1.5Ks prolongs tube life and just really sounds really good. It's a nice change. Down here you can just see I've got two 100 ohm resistors from the heater supply, each side of the heater supply, going here to the cathode of the output tubes, and that gives about a 11 volt in this case DC lift. Here you can see the new cathode bypass capacitor. It's a Vichy 105 degree rated 63 volt 220 microfarad, and I've got a Vichy Dale 68 ohm 10 watt here for the cathode resistor. This came in with the original 82 ohm, which was really kind of on the cold side, and I played around with the Variac because the owner has a brown box, and 114 volts on the mains puts the heaters at 6.3. And with the heaters at 6.3 volts and 114 volts on the mains, this 68 ohm gets us right where we want to be at about 13 watts idle dissipation. And that's enough headroom that if it were plugged into the wall at 120, while the bias would go up a bit higher than optimal, maybe about 14.5 watts, you could use this plug straight into the wall if you forgot or you didn't have your brown box. But with the brown box, it's pretty much optimal. Over here, I cleaned up and redid the wiring on the main dual section filter cap. And down here, where they had that axial cap kind of fragilely connected from this point over to here, I have a new Nichicon 10,000 hour, might be 12,000 hour, 105 degree rated cap. It's very, very small. It's just 33 microfarad for 100 volts. And I mount it to this terminal strip here with some silicone. It's not the kind of suspended in midair axial. And I have the positive here where this resistor comes in and the split goes off to the other preamp stages. And then I have the negative here, but its ground wire is going to the preamp ground section in the main aluminum half of the chassis. I like to keep all the preamp grounds together and just have some grounds made here in the power section. And that has given us a much more stable connection there. Historical note of interest, this 22 watt here, it's not 22 watt, 22K dropping resistor here, which is a 7 watt resistor, is only that 7 watt resistor because they needed to span this distance from here to here. That's what JMI did. A half watt resistor is more than sufficient for the drop across it, but they had a whole bunch of these, so they just laid it out with this long cap. So if you have one of these and you need to replace this 22K going to the vibe trim channel, you don't have to have the big 7 watts, 8 watt resistor. You can just run a wire to a terminal strip and put any half watt or larger 22K there. All right, you can see the original vibe trim volume pot and original Brilliant Channel volume pot are reinstalled back where they have been for many decades, but the base pot was defective. And yes, this is an alpha, this is not a CTS, because the current production CTS 500K audio taper pots have a dead zone at the lower end of their travel. They just go from nothing, nothing, nothing to quite loud at about 9 o'clock. And these alphas do not, and these alphas sound just fine. Thank you very much. And should something go wrong, it's a $2 pot. It's easy to replace. They rarely go wrong in my experience. You might get one from the factory that's not quite the right value, but then you can get that from CTS, as I'll show in a little bit. Those of you who know the AC30 well will know that there's not supposed to be a bright cap on the normal channel volume, but the amp had one as it came in. And since this was already non-original in this area anyway, I do find that a small, in this case 120 picofarad bright cap, makes the normal channel a little more balanced sounding, because in stock form they're fairly dark. Right now we've got the brilliant channel without the top boost added. The top boost will be added last on this amp. I'll rebuild that. I do have the bright cap already in place. The brilliant channel of one of these without the top boost would not have had a bright cap. This one does, and this wire here is temporary just until we return the top boost card to the amp. Moving down the line here, you can see that the tremolo depth trim pot has been removed from the board, and we now have a switched 500K pot here where the old two-position switch was. And push-pull gives us the functions of that two-position switch to go between vibe and trim, but having a full pot there, it's just the pot that used to be here. So from the outside, you can adjust the tremolo depth. More on that in a moment. And here, rather than a three-position switch with 3 different resistor choices for the tremolo speed, I've got a 3 meg CTS reverse audio pot with a limiting resistor to set the max speed, which is what you'd find in a Fender. Unfortunately, this relatively expensive, nominally 3 meg CTS pot is only about 2.4 megs, so I'm missing quite a bit of the depth that I was hoping to get. I've got another different 3 meg reverse audio pot on order, so I can have this minimum slow speed that I want without sacrificing the maximum fast speed. So right now with this pot, which I'm not too happy with, it's kind of a compromise. It doesn't go as fast as I want and doesn't quite go as slow as I want. And that's something you can run into with any brand. So for anyone who had a knee-jerk reaction against using an alpha in the volume there for the bass channel, the normal channel, CTS is not perfect either, especially for volume pots. On that note, I'm not thrilled with how this works right now. This is 150K in series with 500K, which is exactly the same that you would have on the board in the amp. And I'm replacing this 500K with a 1 meg. Because right now, what this 500K lets me do is go from very subtle tremolo to very deep tremolo. With the 1 meg, I can wire that so that it goes from no tremolo, so you can turn the tremolo off from the front panel with the pot rather than having to use a foot switch, to as deep as you want. And that can be nice because the depth seems more shallow in vibe than it does in trim mode. And I'm going to be replacing this not very lovely installed Mallory 150M with a different 100 nanofarad cap when the time comes. But for now, this is the one that was in the amp when it came in. Because I want to move this a little bit farther to the left, and there's not the lead length on this one to really do that. So I'm going to be mounting it down and to the left so there'd be more room for the top boost card. Over here in the normal and brilliant preamp area, the 22K resistor that was here actually measured about 47K and still had the markings of a 22K. It had just drifted way too much. So it's got a new 22K here. And it had a very generic silver mica 470 picofarad here. So that's been replaced with a 1 kilovolt Vichy, which is my preference. And here in the phase inverter output, the 100Ks were metal oxides. And that's not really pretty. And the solder joints were really bad, so I put in some carbon films. Just my preference while I was in the area. The owner said I should do whatever I would do if it were my amp, so I did. And then I have gone through here and cleaned. I have gone through almost an entire roll of paper towels, just literally drenching everything in here with isopropyl and letting all the decades of nicotine and dirt and funk wash out. I mean, it was horrible. Really dark orange, dark brown soup pouring out of the amp. And again, that you don't really notice it except that, hey, the chassis is shiny again. Hey, everything's clean. And cleanliness is next to toneliness. All right, let's start on the vibe trim channel. And let's see here. I've got it switched off. That hum is because I'm sitting with the pickups fairly close to the transformers. That's unavoidable in a bench test. I've got it wired so with the push-pull switch down, in, it's in vibe mode because it gives the channel more gain. I'll let you hear the difference. So I figured to give the channel itself the best initial impression, let's let it be the loudest in. You'll hear the difference. It's not huge. It's not ground shaking. And if the owner sees this and wants it differently, I only have to move one wire. I'm not done with this anyway, so. Let's start with the tremolo, or in this case, vibe, at its slowest and its minimal. Never liked that song, but there it is. Anyway, this got a 750K resistor here, limiting the max speed because the pot, as I mentioned on the speed pot, is not as large as it was supposed to be by about 700K. So once I get a pot that actually measures 3 meg, I can decrease at 750K. I'll probably go down to the stock JMI max speed of 330K. And then you'll have from 330K to 3 meg, 330K. And that'll be a nice range. Similarly on the depth, it's maxed here. But if I turn it down all the way on the pot, there's still some. Because I've got a limiting resistor there, the 150K, which is the stock circuit limiting resistor. If I remove that limiting resistor and just go straight to ground, then fully counterclockwise has no tremolo audible, which is what we want, but there's not enough resistance in the pot itself, 500K, to get the depth that we want. So I'm going to replace it with a 1 meg, and if I need to say, oh, we don't want to go over 800K, I can do a parallel resistor to limit that and tweak it exactly where we want. And that's why you want to have front control over it, to get rid of that thumping. So that's the formerly wimpy, very limited sounding vibe trim channel, which is now none of those things. So let's show the normal channel. And again, it's got a bright cap, which it technically should not have, but I think it makes the channel quite nice. So very nice. And then if you do the thing, imagine that without the hum from the pickups being so close to the transformers. And then the top boost channel, which is not top boost channel, brilliant channel. It'll be top boost again soon. Can't play that band's music on YouTube, which is a shame and a sin because I love that band's music. But I don't want to get copyright strikes or get blocks or anything. Sounds more impressive with pedals turned on there. Anyway, the amp's sounding really promising. Next up, I'm going to find a way to plug this hole neatly. I'm going to replace the switch because it's physically kind of wearing out. And I'm going to redo the primary, can't talk today. I'm going to redo the power cable connections to make it all pretty. And I'm going to hardwire this to 110, 115 rather than rely on that physical flimsy switch. All this has been approved by the owner. And there is a slight buzz in the background that I think can be better, and it's probably a chassis connection which is dirty. And I think it's the one right here by the preamp tube connection where this bus wire goes to chassis and other things go to chassis. I have not thoroughly cleaned that one yet. I've done all the other major ground points in the amp. That one's a little bit harder to reach, but I think it's necessary, so I'm going to go in and do that. And I will also repopulate the top boost card and put it back, so this amp will sound even mo better next time you hear it. Thanks for watching.